Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Diane Jenkins never imagined the night would end with the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue and the cold weight of a gun burning against her trembling palm. Yet fate had a cruel way of dragging secrets into the light at the worst possible moment, because moments earlier she had stood frozen in the shadowed corridor outside Jack Abbott's study, her breath shallow, her heart pounding so violently she feared it would give her away, as she overheard a whispered exchange between Jack and Nikki Newman that shattered everything she thought she knew. A conversation laced with shame, betrayal, and a revolting truth so intimate and morally corrupt that Diane's stomach twisted in horror as each word slithered through the cracked door. Nikki's voice breaking as she confessed to a secret liaison bound not by love but by desperation and manipulation. A pact sealed years ago that had altered lives, ruined marriages, and quietly poisoned Genoa City from within, while Jack's voice, usually so controlled, so righteous, cracked with guilt as he admitted he had buried the truth to protect his empire and his pride, never once considering the collateral damage. And as Diane pressed herself against the wall, bile rising in her throat, she realized with devastating clarity that this secret wasn't merely scandalous, it was dangerous, because it explained too much: the sudden shifts in loyalty, the unexplained favors, the silent wars that had erupted and vanished without reason. And before she could retreat, before she could pretend she had heard nothing, the floorboard beneath her betrayed her presence with a sharp creak that cut through the night like a gunshot, prompting the door to fling open and Jack's eyes to lock onto hers with a flash of panic, Nikki stumbling back as her face drained of color. And in that suspended second Diane saw it all: the calculation, the fear, the unspoken agreement that she could not be allowed to walk away with this knowledge. And chaos erupted. When raised voices echoed, accusations flew, and Nikki lunged forward in a desperate attempt to grab Diane's arm, sending Diane stumbling backward into the darkness where her fingers brushed against cold steel, the gun Jack had hidden away for protection now becoming the center of a nightmare she never wanted. And as Nikki advanced, sobbing and frantic, swearing Diane would destroy everything, Diane screamed for them to stop, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her face. But the room spun. Fear drowned out reason, and when Nikki slipped on the rug and surged forward again, Diane's survival instinct overpowered her morality, her finger tightening around the trigger as her mind screamed that she had no choice, that she was trapped between their disgrace and her own life. And the deafening blast tore through the air, echoing off the walls as smoke filled the room and time seemed to fracture, Jack shouting her name, Nikki collapsing in shock though untouched, and Diane standing frozen, the gun slipping from her grasp as she realized what she had almost done, what she had been forced to do, the sound of the shot reverberating not just through the house but through every fragile bond in Genoa City, because even without blood on the floor the damage was irrevocable, the secret no longer contained, the illusion of decency shattered. And as sirens wailed in the distance and Jack sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands while Nikki sobbed uncontrollably, Diane understood that nothing would ever be the same again, that the truth she had overheard would claw its way into the open, destroying reputations and families alike, and that from this night forward she would forever be remembered not just as a witness to Jack and Nikki's disgusting secret, but as the woman who had been pushed to the edge, forced to fire a gun, and trapped in the unforgiving crossfire of love, power, and betrayal that would haunt them all. The aftermath did not arrive quietly. It crashed down on Diane Jenkins like a tidal wave of consequence, guilt, and terror, because the moment the gunshot faded into ringing silence, the universe seemed to hold its breath, and Diane stood there shaking, staring at the thin curl of smoke drifting from the barrel as if it were a living thing accusing her, reminding her that even a warning shot could never be undone. And as Jack staggered toward her, his face pale and stricken, shouting her name, with a mixture of fury and fear, Diane felt herself retreat inward, her thoughts spiraling as memories collided with the present, because all she could hear now was the echo of Nikki's sobs, the raw, animal sound of a woman whose secrets had finally turned on her. And Nikki's knees buckled as she collapsed onto the couch, clutching her chest and gasping, not from physical injury but from the suffocating realization that the truth was no longer theirs to control. And Diane understood in that instant that the gun had been the least dangerous weapon in the room. The real devastation lay in what she had overheard, the disgusting secret Jack and Nikki had buried beneath years of lies, favors, and silent compromises, a secret that reeked of manipulation and betrayal, one that explained the strange fractures in marriages, the sudden reversals in business wars, The way Genoa City itself seemed to bend to their will when it mattered most. And as the sound of approaching sirens crept closer, slicing through the night like a death knell, Jack grabbed Diane by the shoulders, his grip desperate, his voice hoarse as he demanded to know how much she had heard, how much she understood, and Diane laughed, a broken, hysterical sound, because the answer was everything. She had heard everything, and there was no going back, no pretending ignorance, no safe retreat into silence, because the truth had branded itself into her soul, and she could see it in Jack's eyes that he knew it too, that whatever leverage he once held over the world was slipping through his fingers like sand, while Nikki, wiping her tears with shaking hands, suddenly snapped, her grief transforming into rage as she accused Diane of eavesdropping, of scheming, of forcing their hand, insisting that none of this would have happened if Diane had stayed in her place. And those words struck Diane harder than any slap, because they revealed the rot at the heart of it all, the belief that power excused everything, that secrets were currency, and that anyone who stumbled upon them deserved whatever punishment followed. And Diane felt something inside her harden, the fear slowly giving way to a burning resolve, because she realized she was done being collateral damage in other people's sordid games, done being the woman expected to absorb the fallout while the powerful escaped unscathed. And when Jack demanded she hand over the gun, Diane complied, her fingers numb as she placed it on the desk between them like a symbolic surrender, but her eyes never left theirs, because even unarmed she was no longer powerless, not now, not after what she knew. And when the police finally arrived, lights flashing through the windows, voices barking orders, the scene devolved into chaos, officers separating them, questions fired like bullets, and Diane found herself wrapped in a blanket, sitting alone as she replayed the night over and over in her mind, wondering how a single overheard conversation had detonated her life, while Jack and Nikki were questioned separately, their once united front crumbling under scrutiny, Jack's polished confidence cracking as he struggled to explain why a gun was involved at all, why Diane had felt threatened, why secrets worth killing for seemed to haunt his home, and Nikki's story faltered, her composure dissolving as years of suppressed shame spilled out in fragments, hints of an affair that was never just about desire but about survival, control, and mutual destruction. And though neither of them confessed fully, the truth bled through the cracks, enough for the officers to exchange knowing glances, enough for whispers to begin spreading like wildfire through Genoa City by morning, because secrets in this town never stayed buried for long. And as dawn crept in, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, Diane was released without charges. Self-defense, they said, though the word felt hollow. Yet freedom offered no comfort, because she knew what awaited her outside those doors was worse than a cell. It was a city hungry for scandal, a web of alliances ready to snap, and powerful people desperate to silence her. And when Jack finally approached her as she prepared to leave, his voice soft, pleading, asking her to keep quiet, to let the past remain the past, Diane met his gaze with a calm that surprised even herself, because she saw him clearly now, not as the man she once trusted but as someone who had made choices that rippled outward, destroying lives. And she told him the truth could not be unheard, could not be unfired like a gunshot. And as Nikki watched from a distance, her eyes filled with fear and hatred in equal measure, Diane understood that this was only the beginning, that the disgusting secret she had uncovered would soon crawl into the light, tearing apart marriages, shattering legacies, and forcing Genoa City to reckon with the lies it had allowed to thrive. And as Diane stepped into the morning air, the weight of what she carried pressed down on her chest, because she knew that from this moment on she was a target, a witness, and a catalyst for a reckoning that would change everything forever. The reckoning Diane Jenkins sensed on that gray morning did not wait politely for the sun to rise higher. It stalked her from the moment she stepped back into Genoa City, because the air itself felt charged, heavy with whispers that curled around her like smoke, and every familiar street suddenly seemed hostile, as if the town had already chosen sides before the truth had even fully emerged. And Diane knew with bone-deep certainty that Jack and Nikki were not going to sit back and let their disgusting secret destroy them without a fight, because people with that much power never did. They rewrote narratives, they sacrificed pawns, and they survived. And Diane was painfully aware that she had just been placed squarely in the crosshairs of their survival instinct. And it began subtly at first, with unanswered calls, meetings abruptly cancelled, allies who once smiled at her now looking away as though she were contagious. And then came the more deliberate moves, the veiled warnings, disguised as concern, messages delivered through intermediaries urging her to take care of herself, to remember how dangerous misunderstandings can be, And Diane felt the old fear claw back into her chest, because she recognized the language of intimidation, but this time something inside her refused to bend, because every time she closed her eyes she heard that gunshot again, felt the tremor in her hands, remembered Nikki's hysteria and Jack's naked panic, and she understood that silence would not save her, it would only make her complicit, and the truth, as ugly as it was, deserved air. And when Jack finally confronted her alone, his voice low and controlled as he claimed he only wanted to protect everyone involved, Diane almost laughed at the irony, because protection was the very excuse that had allowed the secret to fester for so long, poisoning marriages, manipulating outcomes, and destroying trust across generations. And she told him she would not be his shield anymore. Not after he had watched her nearly destroy herself under the weight of his lies, and Jack's mask cracked then, just for a moment, revealing anger sharp enough to cut, because he warned her she had no idea what she was up against, that Nikki's world was ruthless, that Victor Newman's shadow loomed large, and at the mention of Victor's name Diane felt a chill race down her spine, because suddenly the secret she had overheard felt even bigger, even darker, a tangled web connecting power, addiction, betrayal, and control, and Diane realized she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than an affair, something that explained decades of grudges inexplicably softened, enemies mysteriously spared, and decisions that had never quite made sense until now. And when Nikki cornered her later, her eyes hollow, her voice trembling between threat and desperation, begging Diane to consider the children, the families, the fallout, Diane felt a flicker of pity but refused to let it weaken her resolve, because Nikki's tears could not erase the damage already done, and Diane told her that fear did not give anyone the right to destroy others quietly, and Nikki's face hardened in response, her vulnerability snapping into something cold and calculating, promising that Diane would regret this defiance. And the city began to shift visibly after that, alliances rearranging, secrets trading hands, because whispers had become rumors and rumors were turning into questions. And journalists circled, sensing blood in the water, while the Abbotts and Newmans closed ranks, issuing denials that rang hollow, and Diane stood alone in the center of the storm, replaying every second of that night, wondering if she should have run, if she should have stayed silent, if pulling that trigger, even in terror, had doomed her beyond redemption. Yet every time doubt threatened to crush her, she remembered Nikki lunging at her, remembered the unspoken understanding between Jack and Nikki, that she was expendable, and Diane knew that telling the truth was the only way she could reclaim herself. And when an unexpected ally emerged, someone who had suspected for years that Jack and Nikki shared a bond far darker than friendship, Diane felt the tide begin to turn, because suddenly she was no longer the lone voice screaming into the void. She was a witness whose story fit too neatly into a larger pattern to be dismissed, and as evidence surfaced, fragments of the past aligning like shattered glass forming a deadly mosaic. The pressure mounted, Nikki unraveling publicly, her composure failing in small but telling ways, Jack growing more erratic as he tried to control the narrative, and Genoa City held its breath, because it sensed that something seismic was coming. And Diane, sitting alone one night with the weight of it all pressing down on her chest, finally allowed herself to cry, not out of fear, but out of grief for the woman she had been before the secret, before the gun, before the moment she realized how easily power crushed morality. And as tears slid down her face, she whispered a vow into the silence that no matter how ugly the truth became, no matter who tried to silence her, she would not back down, because some secrets were so vile, so corrosive, that exposing them was not just necessary, it was inevitable. And Diane Jenkins, once forced to fire a gun to survive, now stood ready to fire the truth into the heart of Genoa City, even if it burned everything she loved to the ground. The end did not arrive with a clean confession or a dramatic arrest. It came instead as a slow, merciless collapse, the kind that strips people bare piece by piece until there is nothing left to hide. And Diane Jenkins stood at the center of it all, exhausted yet unbroken, as the disgusting secret she had overheard finally detonated in full view of Genoa City, because the truth, once whispered, could no longer be contained. And when the final evidence surfaced, documents, testimonies, patterns, too precise to dismiss, it painted a horrifying picture of years of manipulation disguised as necessity, of Jack and Nikki's secret pact born from desperation and sustained by fear, a bond that crossed every moral line and left destruction in its wake. And the city reacted exactly as Diane had known it would, with shock that quickly curdled into outrage, alliances snapping, families fracturing, and reputations collapsing under the weight of what had been hidden for so long. And Jack Abbott, once untouchable, stood before a room full of people who no longer believed his carefully measured words, his voice breaking as he tried to justify the unjustifiable, insisting he had done it to protect his family, his company, his legacy, only to realize too late that legacy built on lies was nothing but a house of cards. While Nikki Newman's downfall was more brutal and more public, her years of carefully managed composure unraveling as the truth exposed the depth of her addiction, her dependence on secrecy and the toxic control she had allowed Jack and herself to wield over others. And Diane watched it all with a hollow ache in her chest, because despite everything, she took no pleasure in their suffering, knowing too well how fear could warp good intentions into monstrous choices. Yet she also knew this reckoning was overdue, and as the fallout spread, the night of the gunshot resurfaced again and again in public discourse, dissected by lawyers, reporters, and armchair judges alike. Some painting Diane as a hero who had survived intimidation, others branding her reckless, dangerous, and opportunistic, and Diane bore it all in silence, because she understood that truth rarely came with universal approval, and the legal consequences unfolded in devastating fashion. Civil suits, criminal inquiries, boards turning against Jack, Nikki forced into treatment under the glare of public scrutiny, and Genoa City itself seemed to mourn the loss of its illusions, because if figures as powerful as Jack Abbott and Nikki Newman could fall, then no one was truly safe from the consequences of their secrets. And in the quiet aftermath, when the chaos finally slowed, Diane found herself alone again, standing in the same house where it had all begun, the echo of the gunshot still haunting the walls, and she reflected on how one overheard conversation had changed her forever, had forced her to confront her own limits, her own fear, and her own capacity for courage. And as she packed her things, preparing to leave Genoa City behind, at least for a while, Diane realized that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about refusing to let fear dictate who you became afterward. And before she left, she crossed paths with Jack one final time, his eyes hollow, his voice barely above a whisper as he admitted he was sorry, not just for the secret, but for pushing her to the edge, for making her feel her life was expendable. And Diane accepted his apology not as absolution, but as closure, because forgiveness did not mean forgetting. And when Nikki sent word through a third party, too ashamed to face Diane directly, Diane felt a strange sense of peace, because the silence no longer felt like power, it felt like surrender. And as Diane drove away, the city shrinking in her rearview mirror, she understood that while Genoa City would rebuild, the scars would remain, serving as a reminder that secrets fester in darkness and explode in light. And Diane Jenkins, once forced to fire a gun in terror, now carried something far more powerful than fear. A hard-won truth that had cost her everything, yet given her something priceless in return. Her soul intact, her voice unbroken, and the knowledge that even in a world ruled by power and lies, one person's refusal to stay silent could change everything forever.